There's a stretch of country in southeastern Oklahoma called the Sans Bois Mountains. It isn't dramatic country, not the kind of landscape that wins postcards. It's low ridges and dense scrub oak, sandstone outcrops half swallowed by brush, hollows that fold in on themselves and hide what's at the bottom. The roads thin out fast. The cell signal goes first, then the houses, then the road itself, until you're following a track that might be a road, or might just be where the truck before yours flattened the grass. The locals call it the back country, which understates it. It's the kind of place where a person can be 3 miles from their car and might as well be on another planet. In 2009, a family of 3 from the nearby town of Eufaula went into those mountains. Bobby Jamison was 44, his wife, Sherilynn, was 40. Their daughter, Madison, Maddie to the family, was 6 years old. They had a dog with them, a small brown mutt called Maisie. They were going to look at a 40-acre plot of land near Red Oak, about 30 miles from home. The seller had told them it was a beautiful piece of property, the kind of land you build a cabin on. They'd been looking for somewhere to start over for a while. This was, on paper, an ordinary Thursday morning errand. The morning of the 8th of October, a security camera on a building near the Jamisons' home recorded them loading the truck. The footage is grainy, black and white, no audio, the kind of low-resolution surveillance that leaves a lot to imagination. But what investigators have said about it consistently for 16 years is this. Bobby and Sherilynn made several silent trips between the house and the pickup. Their movements were what one detective described as trance-like. There was no conversation, there was no body language of 2 adults discussing where to put a bag or which jacket to bring. Just the 2 of them, walking back and forth, loading the truck. At one point, Sherilynn carried a brown briefcase out and put it in the cab. That briefcase was never seen again. A few days later, a local man driving down a rough dirt road south of Kinta in Latimer County came across an unfamiliar pickup truck. It was locked. It was sitting more or less upright on a track that didn't go anywhere in particular. There was nobody around it. He looked through the windows. Inside was the dog. Maisie had been in that locked truck for days. She was alive, barely. She was so dehydrated and so badly malnourished that the responders who got her out weren't sure she'd survive the trip to a vet. She did, eventually. She was the only living member of the party that left Eufaula on the 8th of October. That was the first thing that wasn't right. The second thing was what else was in the truck. When investigators went through the cab, they found both adults' wallets with their identification still inside. They found both of their mobile phones. They found a GPS unit that, when they powered it up, showed the routes the family had been driving recently. They found jackets that would have been useful given that the nighttime temperatures in the Sans Bois Mountains in October can drop into the low 30s. They found roughly $32,000 in cash. This was a family that, by all accounts, did not have $32,000 in spare cash. The source of the money has never been satisfactorily explained. The most generous interpretation is that they had drawn it out for the land purchase. The least generous involves the local methamphetamine economy, which we'll come back to. What everyone agrees on is that the money was there in the truck, and that nobody had taken it. And then there was the letter. In the cab, somewhere among Sherilynn's belongings, was an 11-page handwritten letter. It was from Sherilynn, addressed to Bobby. It listed everything she hated about him. It said he was a loner. It said he was a hermit. It said she wanted a divorce. It is not a calm document. It is not a planning document. It is the kind of letter a person writes when they have been holding a great deal in for a long time and the dam has finally broken. Sherilynn's handgun, a .22 caliber pistol that she was known to carry, was missing. So was the brown briefcase from the surveillance footage. So were Bobby, Sherilynn, and Maddie. The search began almost immediately. Latimer County is not a wealthy county and it does not have a large sheriff's department, but the Jamison case became a state-level priority within days. Sheriff Israel Beauchamp led the initial effort. Search dogs were brought in. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew the ridges. Volunteers from across the state, and as the case grew nationally famous, from across the country, combed the brush in slow lines. They found nothing. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, not a scrap of fabric, not a single piece of physical evidence that the Jamisons had ever stood in the country around the truck. It was as if they had walked away from the vehicle and then, almost immediately, ceased to exist. For 4 years that was the case. There were sightings, of course. There always are. Someone in another state thought they'd seen Bobby. Someone else thought they'd seen Maddie at a gas station. Each sighting was investigated. Each one led nowhere. The case stayed open and stayed cold, which is its own kind of cruelty, because it doesn't allow the people left behind, Sherilynn's son Colton in particular, who had lost custody of his mother only a few months before she vanished, to grieve cleanly. In November of 2013, two deer hunters were working their way through a remote part of Panola Mountain in a place called Smokestack Hollow. It was rough country, hard to walk through, the kind of place no one without a reason would go. They were following a deer trail. They found 3 skeletons, 2 adult, 1 child. They were lying on the ground, side by side. They were face down, distance from the spot where the Jamisons' truck had been parked 4 years earlier, 2.7 miles through some of the most difficult terrain in the Sans Bois. The Oklahoma Medical Examiner's Office took the remains. It took 8 more months, but on the 3rd of July 2014, the office confirmed what the Latimer County Sheriff's Office and Sherilynn's family had already accepted. The remains were Bobby, Sherilynn, and Madison Jamison. And then, having found them, having finally, after 4.5 years, recovered the bodies, the case got harder, not easier. Because there was no cause of death. The bodies were too far gone. After 4 years exposed to Oklahoma weather, to Oklahoma wildlife, to 4 winters and 4 summers in a wooded hollow, there simply wasn't enough left of them for a forensic pathologist to say what had happened. There were no soft tissues. There were no organs to test for poison or for drugs. There were no obvious wounds to the bones, no fractures consistent with a fall, no obvious cuts, no clear bullet trajectories. There was a small hole in one adult skull that was very briefly examined as a possible bullet entry wound. That theory was set aside. The hole could have been weathering. It could have been the work of an animal. It could have been a wound. The skeleton couldn't tell anyone which. So Bobby, Sherilynn, and Madison Jamison had been killed, or had killed themselves, or had simply died, and the bones could not say which. This is where the case opens out into theories, and where the Jamison case becomes a particular kind of problem. There are at least 6 theories that people take seriously. None of them is provable. Several of them contradict each other. All of them fit some of the facts and ignore others. The first is murder-suicide. The case for murder-suicide is that Sherilynn was, by all surviving accounts, in genuine crisis in the autumn of 2009. In July of that year, she had lost custody of her son Colton, a 12-year-old from a previous marriage, to her ex-husband. Colton had told the court he preferred to live with his father. He had described his mother as very depressed and as acting strangely. In September, 2 months before the disappearance, Sherilynn was hospitalized after a failed suicide attempt. The 11-page letter in the truck spoke of wanting a divorce. The pistol was missing. The bodies were found together in a posture, face down, side by side, that does not look like the result of 3 people falling separately. To some investigators, this is the explanation that requires the fewest moving parts. A mother in crisis, a marriage in crisis, a long drive to a remote spot, a final act. The case against is that the bones don't show it. There are no visible bullet wounds in the recovered skeletons. The pistol was never found, despite the area being searched. And a 6-year-old being part of a parent's suicide is, while not unheard of, an extreme outcome. It requires a level of decision in both adults that the hate letter in the truck argues against. The letter is hostile. It is not collaborative. It does not read like the product of 2 parents on the same page about anything, including ending things together. The second theory is a drug-related murder. The Sans Bois region has a long-documented methamphetamine problem. Bobby Jamison had recently filed a formal report with the police about a local meth lab operator. He had also, the year before, sued his own father for what he claimed were threats and a vehicular assault, and the lawsuit had alleged his father's involvement in methamphetamine. Police looked at his father and cleared him. But the broader picture, Bobby, as a man on bad terms with the local drug trade holding $32,000 in cash that nobody could explain, fits a scenario in which the family was disappeared by people who had reason to want them disappeared. The remoteness of the body site fits. So does the staging of the truck, locked with valuables inside, with a dog left to die, which would only be done by people who wanted it to look like the family had simply walked off. The case against is that no drug trade evidence ties the Jamisons to anyone. Bobby was a complainant, not a participant. No suspects have ever been publicly named, no witnesses have come forward, and a professional disappearance by people who could pull off a triple murder on rough terrain would not, generally speaking, leave the bodies where they could be found by hunters 4 years later. The third theory is exposure. The Sans Bois Mountains can kill you, and the Sans Bois Mountains have killed people before. In October, the days are still warm, but the nights are cold. The brush is dense, cell signal is unreliable. A 6-year-old slows a party considerably. If the Jamisons left the truck for some reason, to walk to the property, to investigate a sound, to follow something, and if they then got turned around in the brush, and if they couldn't find their way back, exposure could account for everything. But it doesn't quite. They had jackets in the truck and didn't take them. Why? They left the dog locked in the truck. Why? Where was Sherilynn's pistol? And why, of all things, was that the one piece of luggage that travelled with them? And the bodies. The bodies were face down, side by side, in a hollow nearly 3 miles in. People dying of exposure typically don't end up that way. They scatter. They walk separately, looking for help. They die in different places. They don't generally die together in a row, face down. The fourth theory is the one the case can never quite shake. A few months before the family disappeared, Bobby and Sherilynn had spoken to their pastor, a man named Gary Brandon, about strange things happening in their home. They had told him on more than one occasion that they were seeing spirits. Bobby had allegedly mentioned around the same time that he had been reading from a copy of the Satanic Bible. No copy of the book was ever found in the home or in the truck. The pastor's recollection is the only source for it, but the recollection is on record, and it has been on record for 16 years, and it has shaped the case in the popular imagination more than any other single detail. The theory, when it's stated openly, is that the family was killed, or killed themselves, as part of some kind of spiritual collapse. That they walked into the mountains in a state that the surveillance footage hints at in trance-like silence on a path nobody else can quite see. That something in the house, real or imagined, had become bigger than they could carry, and they took it with them into the trees. What this theory is, in the cold light, is a frame. It tells us about the family's interior life. It tells us they were spiritually disturbed in their final months. It does not tell us how they died. It does not tell us where the gun went. It does not tell us why their bodies were positioned the way they were. It is the part of the case that gives the case its peculiar atmosphere. But it is not, in the end, an answer. There are 2 more theories worth naming. The fifth, which was floated by investigators in the early years, was that the disappearance was staged, that the family had taken the cash and the briefcase and walked into a new life, witness protection, a new identity, a planned escape from something we don't know about. This theory is now dead. The bodies were found. They were the Jamisons. The remains were positively identified by the medical examiner. Whatever else this case is, it isn't a faked death. The sixth is that they simply got lost. Not exposure exactly, but a series of small misjudgments. A wrong turn off the dirt road, a quick walk that became a longer one, the sun going down, the brush closing in, the family huddling together when it was already too late. Some investigators have always quietly favoured this theory because it requires the fewest leaps. It doesn't explain the gun, it doesn't explain the cash, it doesn't explain the surveillance footage, but it accounts for the body position. 3 people staying close, going still in the cold. What we can say after 16 years is that the Jamison family disappeared on the 8th of October 2009, that their bodies were found 4 years later 2.7 miles from where their truck had been left, and that the Oklahoma Medical Examiner's office could not, given what was left of them, say what had killed them. What we can also say is that one of the people in the truck on the morning of the 8th was 6 years old. That detail has shaped how the case is remembered. There is a particular kind of carefulness in the way Latimer County still talks about the Jamisons, even now. The way the deputies pause when they're asked about it, the way the pastor refuses to elaborate, the way the volunteer searchers, some of whom are still alive and still in the area, will tell you they walked that brush 100 times and never found a thing. There is one figure left to mention before this story closes. The dog. Maisie was found alive in the locked truck. She survived. She was taken in. She was cared for. She lived out her life, by all accounts, in safety and in love. She is the only member of that pickup on the morning of the 8th of October who got to grow old. Whatever happened in those mountains, it happened to the people who walked away from her. The 40-acre plot of land the Jamisons were going to look at is still out there. So is the dirt road south of Kinta, where the truck was found. So is the hollow on Panola Mountain, where the bodies were lying for 4 years before the hunters came through. The Sans Bois Mountains have not changed. They are the same low ridges and the same dense brush and the same hollows folding in on themselves, and they keep what they keep. Was it a murder-suicide born of a marriage that had finally cracked in a place remote enough that no one would interrupt? Was it a drug trade murder with the cash and the gun pointing somewhere we never quite got to? Was it 3 people lost in the cold holding onto each other in a hollow they couldn't walk out of? Was it, as the family themselves seemed to believe in their last months, something walking with them that nobody else could see? The medical examiner couldn't say, the sheriffs couldn't say, the pastor wouldn't. The mountains never have.